The acrid smell of smoke clung to his nostrils as he stumbled over the jagged concrete, his chest heaving with the ragged rhythm of panic. Every breath tasted like ash. Every sound, groaning beams, cracking plaster, distant sirens, pulled him further into the nightmare he hadn't been ready to face. His eyes swept over the ruined remains of what had been his home. The walls collapsed, the furniture splintered, and in the middle of the chaos, an emptiness yawned where he had last seen the dog. He called the name instinctively, voice breaking against the weight of rubble. Max! No bark, no whine, just the echo of his own desperation bouncing off the fractured walls. He sank to his knees, fingers trembling as they brushed over the cold dust, fearing the worst. Every heartbeat was a countdown, every second stretching into unbearable silence, until a faint, almost imperceptible sound prickled his ears. A tiny raw bark, cracked and hoarse, rose from somewhere beneath the wreckage, and his soul lifted and shattered at once. Max was still alive. The sky was a swollen gray, heavy with the promise of rain, yet the storm outside seemed almost polite compared to the one inside him, a tongue in the air like a choking fog, settling on his eyelashes and coating the inside of his throat with every shallow, trembling breath. He stumbled through the debris, his boots crunching over splintered wood and shards of glass that glittered like cruel stars against the dim light. The street, once familiar, was unrecognizable, a graveyard of asphalt and brick, of what had been homes, walls, and laughter now flattened into a landscape of ruin. His eyes searched desperately, darting from twisted metal to overturned furniture, every corner a potential tomb. The thought of Max being gone, really gone, gripped him like a vice. He called again, voice rough and jagged from screaming too many times, Max! The sound bounced back in hollow echoes, swallowed by the emptiness and the broken structures that surrounded. Sweat ran down his back, mingling with the gray dust that streaked his face, while the wind tugged at his clothes and hair, carrying the faint tang of smoke and something he couldn't immediately identify. Burnt fabric, melted plastic, something lost beyond repair. He paused, his chest heaving, hands pressed against the edge of a collapsed wall. He tried to tell himself he was imagining the worst, that Max had simply fled, frightened, somewhere nearby. But his heart whispered truths his rational mind refused to admit. The absence of that familiar presence, soft fur brushing his leg, the rhythmic thump of paws on the floor, was a silence heavier than the rubble around him. Every instinct in him screamed to move faster, to lift heavier beams, to search every crevice, every hollow space. But the world was uncooperative. A broken window frame caught his shoulder, sending a jolt of pain through his arm, and he winced, teeth clenched against the sting. The silence was suffocating, punctuated only by distant sirens and the occasional crack of shifting debris. He crouched low, scanning the chaos with eyes wide and desperate. Each fragment of concrete, each jagged plank could hide a life. And Max's life, his heartbeat, his warmth, his entire essence, might be trapped beneath one of them. He sank to his knees, letting the weight of hopelessness press into his limbs. Dust rose in little clouds around him as he shifted, small puffs that carried with them the ghost of what had once been. He ran his hands over the cold, uneven surfaces, brushing against broken tiles, shards of glass, and splintered furniture. Every touch sent shivers through his body, a violent reminder of how fragile everything had become. Memories flooded in uninvited, Max bounding across the backyard, tail wagging with reckless joy. The way his paws had tapped softly on the floor at night, the warmth pressed against his chest in the quiet hours before dawn. Those memories were needles, sharp and sweet, each one stabbing him with grief while fueling a desperate urgency. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, swallowing back a sob, and listened. The world around him was a cruel echo chamber, amplifying emptiness. But then, a whisper, so faint he almost dismissed it. A sound that might have been the wind shifting through the broken boards. No, it was something else. A soft, hoarse noise, almost imperceptible, rising and falling in the rhythm of hope. His eyes snapped open, his ears straining. He tilted his head, heart hammering in a wild, uncontrolled rhythm. Max, the word slipped out, ragged and raw, and the sound of it seemed to shake the air around him. A small, desperate bark, cracked and strangled by fear, answered him from beneath the rubble. The world shifted at that sound. Panic and relief collided violently, leaving him breathless and shaking. Adrenaline surged through his veins, sharpening every sense. He could hear Max's breathing, quick and uneven, and the faint scraping of paws against debris. His mind oscillated between fear and determination, between despair and hope. The gravity of the task ahead settled over him. This wasn't a moment for hesitation, for indecision. Every second he wasted could cost the life of the creature who had been his companion, his anchor, his family. Hands trembling, he began to move through the rubble systematically, lifting small pieces of debris, shifting loose stones and splintered wood. Each movement was careful, calculated, yet frantic in its urgency. The weight of broken concrete pressed against his hands, biting into his skin, but he barely noticed. Dust coated his palms, his clothes, and his face, merging with tears that streaked down unheeded. The faint bark rose again, and he followed it like a lifeline, a thin thread connecting him to the flickering hope that Max was still there, still fighting, still alive. Time stretched, elastic and cruel. Minutes felt like hours as he navigated the wreckage. Each step was a negotiation with gravity, a delicate dance over unstable ground. Every shard of metal and broken glass became an obstacle, every hollow space a potential death trap. And yet, he pressed on, driven by a singular focus. Max. The thought of failure was unbearable, a shadow that threatened to swallow him whole. He remembered the first day he had brought Max home, the puppy's tiny paws and clumsy steps, the way his eyes had followed him everywhere with unguarded trust. That trust, that bond, was the only thing grounding him amidst the chaos. He paused again, chest heaving, and listened. The bark came again, more distinct this time, guiding him like a faint lantern in the darkness. He crawled through a narrow space beneath a collapsed wall, fingers scraping against rough concrete, the scrape echoing ominously in the hollowed air. The sound of Max's voice, small, desperate, insistent, was a drumbeat of hope. He whispered, coaxed, encouraged, every word a lifeline, every tone soaked in love and fear. "I'm here, buddy. I'm coming. Hold on, please hold on." And with that, he began the final crawl toward the source, the broken world pressing in around him. Every crack and creak a reminder of the danger, yet every faint sound from Max a reason to continue. When he finally reached the spot, the faint outline of Max's body appeared beneath the debris, a small, trembling figure, dust-coated, eyes wide and terrified. Relief collided with raw emotion, and he dropped to his knees beside the dog, fingers carefully moving stones away from the fragile form. Max whimpered, pressed close, and the bond between them crystallized in that moment of shared vulnerability. The world around them still groaned and shifted, but for the first time since the disaster, a fragile calm settled. He clutched Max to his chest, inhaling the familiar scent of fur, dirt, and fear, and allowed himself a sob, not caring who heard. In that silence, broken only by soft whimpers and the settling of rubble, he realized something profound. Loss had been imminent, hope had been fragile, yet life had endured. The echo of Max's bark, faint and strained, had led him through despair to this moment, a beacon amidst ruin. And as he held him, rocking slightly against the chill of concrete and ash, he knew that the journey was only beginning, that the rescue was not just physical, but emotional, a descent into fear and an ascent into love, a reminder of the fragility and resilience intertwined in every heartbeat. The first rays of dawn struggled through the thick gray clouds, casting a muted, silvery light across the ruined street. Dust hung in the air like suspended sorrow, illuminated in thin streams, and every broken surface seemed to glint with a cruel kind of beauty. He carried Max carefully, feeling the trembling weight of the small body against his chest, each heartbeat a fragile drum of life. The dog's fur was matted with soot and dust, his breath shallow, erratic yet persistent. The bark that had given him hope the night before was now a faint memory, replaced by the soft, frightened whines that made him tighten his arms around the trembling animal. He was aware of the world collapsing around him, the groans of unstable buildings, the shifting of rubble underfoot, but in this fragile cocoon of warmth and life, the chaos seemed temporarily held at bay. Every step he took was a negotiation with the uneven terrain. Jagged edges of concrete tore at his boots, splintered wood scraped his arms, and the faint metallic tang of blood, his own scraped knuckles mingling with the unknown, filled his nose. The wind carried voices, distant shouts, someone calling for help, the faint crackle of emergency radios, but none of them reached him fully. He was attuned only to Max, to the tiny shifts of body and tail, to the rise and fall of fragile breathing. Every twitch of a paw, every faint whimper was a signal, a code he had learned to interpret in desperation. Hope had taken on a physical weight, fragile yet insistent, guiding his hands and feet through the maze of devastation. He found himself in a narrow corridor between two partially collapsed buildings, walls leaning precariously like exhausted giants. Light filtered through cracks in uneven angles, striking Max in fleeting, fragmented patterns, and the dog flinched instinctively. He whispered softly, the sound of his voice meant to soothe both of them. Almost there, buddy. Almost out. Dust clung to his hair and clothes, a constant companion, and the smell of wet cement mixed with something earthy, fallen bricks, rain-damp soil. Each inhale reminded him of the vulnerability of this moment, the fragility of life trapped beneath the ruins. And yet Max was alive, and that knowledge lent him a courage that was raw, untamed, urgent. They paused near a collapsed stairwell, and he listened intently, tuning into the faintest noises. A shiver ran down his spine as a small, almost imperceptible scratching reached his ears, coming from somewhere deeper in the debris. Max's ears pricked, body tense as though he had heard it too. The sound was so subtle it could have been imagined, yet it carried the weight of possibility. He knelt slowly, setting Max down in the safest patch of concrete he could find, and crouched beside him, hands hovering above the unstable floor, ready to move at the slightest sign of life. The dog trembled against him, a tiny, quivering vessel of hope and fear, and he stroked for damp with ash and sweat, murmuring gentle reassurances. The tactile sensation, the warmth beneath his hands, the steady pulse beneath fur, was grounding, a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. Every small sound now carried monumental significance. A distant thump might have been shifting rubble, or a cry, a call from another lost soul. But he responded to each with instinctive urgency. When a faint scrape echoed from a collapsed wall, he leaned closer, eyes narrowing, heart hammering. "Is that you, Max?" His voice broke, brittle with anxiety and yearning. The soft whine that followed confirmed it. The dog was still there, trapped but alive, waiting, holding on in the darkness. The realization that the animal had survived through the night, through suffocating fear and isolation, sent a mixture of relief and guilt coursing through him. He should have been faster, stronger, more vigilant. But survival was not a moral equation. It was a negotiation with luck, with fate. He spent hours moving carefully, scraping away loose stones and planks, the texture rough beneath his palms, each fragment a reminder of the danger. The faintest movements of Max guided his hands, teaching him patience, teaching him to read the language of fear and hope. The dog's trembling body was a compass, signaling pain, resistance, but also endurance. He whispered encouragement, a litany of love, apology, and promise. "I won't let go. I won't leave you. We'll get through this." Time lost meaning as his movements became ritualistic, almost meditative. And dust swirled with the morning breeze, and the occasional beam of sunlight striking through broken windows created fleeting patterns on the rubble, painting both despair and possibility in the same brushstroke. As he worked, he noticed subtle signs. A tuft of fur caught on a jagged edge, paw marks in the thin layer of dust, a whimper muffled beneath heavier debris. Each sign was a lifeline, a fragile thread pulling him toward certainty. He bent low, positioning his hands beneath a fallen beam, the wood splintering under pressure, every fiber vibrating with tension. He murmured softly, coaxing Max to move slightly, to shift to respond. The dog obeyed in small increments, trembling yet cooperative, and the rhythm of their interaction became almost sacred. A shared understanding of survival. The tactile connection, the warmth pressed against him, the whispered reassurances became the emotional anchor, holding him steady in a world that threatened to collapse around them. By midday, a light drizzle began to fall, tiny droplets mixing with the dust to form a gritty mud underfoot, cooling his heated skin, soaking into his clothes and hair. Each droplet splattered across Max's fur, clinging to his trembling body, yet it felt purifying somehow, a baptism, a gentle reminder that life persisted even amidst devastation. The sound of rain was both comforting and terrifying, masking some noises while amplifying others. He pressed forward, undeterred, balancing hope against fear. Every soft whine from Max, every subtle shift, was a compass guiding him through the labyrinth of destruction. The whispers of life cutting through the silence like fragile beacons. The hours of searching brought them to a partially collapsed doorway, where the faint outline of Max's body appeared beneath heavier debris. Relief surged. a tidal wave so intense it made his vision blur. He knelt, hands shaking, and began removing stones and shattered wood, speaking softly, intimately. "Almost there, Max. I'm right here. You can do it. I've got the tactile connection, the brush of fur beneath his fingers, the warmth of a living being pressing against him, anchored him, tempered his panic, and allowed him to focus fully on the rescue. Every fragment removed, every small sound interpreted, was a negotiation with survival, a delicate dance of patience and determination. The first clear bark erupted, hoarse and brittle, yet triumphant, cutting through the ambient chaos like a bright note in a minor symphony. His heart leapt and tears blurred the rain-soaked landscape. Hope was no longer fragile. It had become real, palpable, guiding his movements as he carefully extracted Max from the confines of rubble. And as the small body pressed against him, quivering but alive, the bond between them deepened, a living testament to endurance, trust, and the quiet power of survival. In the midst of destruction, dust, and rain, the world seemed momentarily suspended. Each droplet, each grain of concrete, each beat of a frightened heart merged into a singular truth. Life could persist, even in the shadows of devastation, and whispers of hope, fragile yet insistent, could lead them from darkness into the possibility of rescue. The air had thickened, damp from the rain that now fell steadily, a constant drumming on fractured concrete and twisted metal. Each droplet hit his shoulders, ran down his face, and mingled with sweat and ash, a stinging reminder of how long he had been in this nightmare. Max lay beneath a heavy beam, trembling violently, small whimpers breaking the rhythm of the storm. Every instinct screamed at him to move faster, yet every movement had to be deliberate, careful. One wrong shift and both of them could be crushed beneath the weight of ruin. His hands were raw from scraping and lifting fragments of debris, nails splitting, skin bleeding, but the pain was irrelevant. All that mattered was Max, alive and fighting, small and fragile against the chaos surrounding them. He positioned himself closer, pressing his forehead against the cool, wet concrete for balance, and assessed the impossibility before him. The beam above Max was thick, jagged, unforgiving. He could feel it shifting slightly as he nudged it, the heavy vibrations humming through his fingers into his arms. Yet the dog flinched at every sound, eyes wide with terror. The sight tore at his chest. Max had trusted him with his life, and here he was, powerless against the weight that pinned him. The world had narrowed to the space between his hands and the beam, to the soft whine of a dog whose trust and fear were woven into a single fragile thread. He murmured encouragement, soft and insistent, over the rain, over the rubble. "I've got you, buddy. Hold on. Just a little longer." He began the painstaking work of shifting the debris, leaning into the beam with every ounce of strength, feeling it tremble under his effort. Tiny fragments crumbled, dust rising in muted clouds that stung his eyes and filled his lungs, yet he persisted. Max whimpered, a sound that sliced through his fatigue and despair, and he adjusted, coaxing the dog to shift just enough to relieve pressure from a paw caught beneath a splintered plank. The tactile connection was everything. Feeling Max's slight movement under his fingertips gave him guidance, allowed him to anticipate and adjust. It was a conversation without words, an intricate negotiation with life itself. A sudden groan of shifting concrete made him freeze, heart leaping to his throat. The beam above trembled ominously, but the dog pressed closer in instinctive trust, eyes locked onto his. The danger was immense, yet so was determination. He pressed his shoulder into the beam, pushing with all the strength he could summon, teeth gritted, breath ragged, every muscle trembling under the effort. A stone dislodged, clattering loudly, and Max flinched, then whimpered but held his ground against fear, his fragile trust unwavering. That trust was sacred, and the weight of responsibility pressed on him with every heartbeat. Minutes stretched into eternity. His fingers dug into crevices, finding purchase, shifting debris millimeter by millimeter. Each success was tiny, almost imperceptible, yet monumental. A nail bent here, a plank nudged there. A stone lifted just enough to ease the pressure on Max's chest. He felt the dog's trembling start to ease as the beam shifted fractionally, Max's small body relaxing against him in cautious hope. Tears mingled with rain on his cheeks, blurring the jagged edges of the world into a soft haze. The raw physicality of the rescue mirrored the emotional intensity. The ache in his muscles, the pounding of his heart, the sting of dust in every breath, all interwoven with the elation of progress. At one point, he had to wedge his body beneath the beam, crawling inch by inch, feeling the rough concrete dig into his back, feeling Max press tremblingly beneath him. The rain-soaked debris slicked his clothes, mud caking his hands, but he didn't stop. He whispered to Max in a voice rough from shouting and emotion, "Almost free." "Hold on, buddy. You're so close." Max's tiny paws twitched, his whimpers softening to a fragile whine, and that small, tentative response was enough. It was proof that they were moving toward salvation together, step by agonizing step. Finally, the beam shifted enough for him to pull Max partially free. The dog pressed against him, trembling violently, but his eyes held recognition and relief. Every muscle in his body screamed with exhaustion, but the sight of Max moving, breathing, alive, ignited a raw surge of energy. He carefully cradled the dog, navigating the treacherous debris as the rain continued to pour, masking their movements with its relentless rhythm. The tactile connection, the warmth of life pressed against him, the pulse beneath fur, was both grounding and euphoric. In this moment, every ounce of fear, every second of despair was eclipsed by the miracle of survival. As he pulled Max fully into his arms, the world around them seemed to collapse and reconstruct simultaneously. The storm's rhythm became a heartbeat shared between them, the trembling of Max a mirror to his own exhausted, exhilarated shaking. Mud and dust coated both of them, mingling indistinguishably with sweat and rain, and he laughed through tears, the sound raw and unfiltered, mingling with Max's bark, a small, hoarse exclamation of life. The rescue was complete, yet the experience had etched itself into their bodies, a memory of terror, endurance, and fragile triumph. He sat amidst the wreckage, holding Max tightly against his chest, feeling the small, rapid heartbeat beneath his palm, the tiny tremors of relief and lingering fear. The rain soaked them both, running in rivulets across his face, dripping into the collar of Max's fur, but he scarcely noticed. His mind was consumed with gratitude and disbelief. Gratitude that life had persisted, disbelief at the closeness of loss, and the knowledge that every step, every cautious movement, had been critical. The tactile intimacy of the rescue, the shared warmth, the trembling bodies, the whispered reassurances, had forged a bond deeper than words could capture. As the storm began to ease, the muted light of late morning filtered through the clouds, illuminating the ruined street in soft, fragmented patterns. He surveyed the wreckage, the collapsed walls, the jagged debris, and felt the weight of what had been lost. Yet in this moment, holding Max alive and trembling against him, he understood something profound. Survival was not measured by the absence of danger, but by the courage to move through it, step by painstaking step. And Max, small, fragile, alive, embodied that courage, that miraculous resilience, that fragile thread connecting hope to reality. He whispered again, softer now, voice breaking with exhaustion and relief, "We did it. We're okay. You're okay." Max nuzzled against him, small paws resting on his shoulder, ears flattening in tentative trust. The tactile connection, the warmth pressed to his chest, the shiver of relief beneath his fingers, became a meditation on endurance, trust, and the quiet heroism of survival. And as he sat there, rain-soaked and mud-streaked, cradling the small, trembling body, he realized that the act of rescue had changed him. It had stripped away pretense, left him raw, exposed, and intimately aware of the fragile brilliance of life clinging to the world amid ruin. Even as exhaustion threatened to collapse him, he felt a faint surge of hope for the future, fragile but persistent. The rescue had been more than physical. It had been emotional, spiritual, a testament to connection, trust, and love. Max's small body, alive and trembling, was a living beacon, proof that even amid devastation, life could endure, hope could persist, and courage could manifest in the quiet, persistent struggle to save what matters most. And in that quiet aftermath, the world seemed momentarily softened, fractured and dangerous, yet illuminated by the fragile, unwavering light of survival. The rain had finally tapered into a gentle drizzle, leaving the air cool, damp, and tinged with the earthy scent of wet concrete and broken soil. He carried Max carefully, every step a negotiation between exhaustion and the fragile pulse of life beneath his hands. The dog was quiet now, trembling slightly, eyes wide but slowly beginning to focus. Each heartbeat against his chest was a reminder of how close they had come to loss. He felt the weight of responsibility more acutely than ever, a gravity that pressed on his ribs almost physically. Max had survived, yes, but the danger wasn't entirely gone, and every small injury mattered. His own arms ached, every muscle trembling from the night's exertion, yet he forced himself to move forward, guided by the soft, fragile warmth of life pressed against him. They found a relatively intact corner amidst the ruin, a small patch of shelter beneath the remains of a roof that had somehow resisted collapse. He lowered Max gently onto the concrete floor, careful to avoid jostling the fragile body. The dog whimpered softly, tail tucked beneath him, and pressed close to the warmth of the man's hand. He knelt beside him, inspecting for cuts and abrasions, his fingers running through fur matted with mud, ash, and rain. Small wounds revealed themselves. Scratches along the flank, a minor gash across a paw pad, bruises beneath fur, but nothing catastrophic. Relief washed through him, tempered by guilt for the moments he had not been fast enough. That brief fraction of time where survival had teetered on a knife's edge. He worked methodically, cleaning Max's wounds with the water he had collected in a broken plastic bottle, each movement careful, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Every droplet that fell against the dog's fur carried a symbolic weight. Washing away more than just grime, it cleansed fear, soothed trembling muscles, and offered reassurance that life, fragile and persistent, could continue. Max's body, once taut with terror, began to relax in small increments, pressing slightly closer, nuzzling against the warmth of his hands. Tactile intimacy, the weight and heat of a living being depending on him, grounded him, anchoring him to purpose in a world that had threatened to dissolve into chaos. The surrounding ruins seemed quieter now, almost contemplative. Pigeons dared to flutter over broken ledges, rainwater pooled in shallow depressions, reflecting fractured sky above. Every sound, every texture, every small detail seemed amplified in this post-rescue stillness. He realized that recovery was not merely a matter of survival. It was a negotiation with time, with patience, and with trust. Max had endured fear, pain, and disorientation, and now he needed tenderness, the slow reassurance that the world was not a threat. He whispered softly, words laced with apology and promise. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I won't let it happen again. We'll heal together." Hours passed in small gestures, brushing fur, speaking softly, offering water and tiny sips, watching Max slowly regain his bearings. Dog's trembling lessened incrementally, tail wagging in cautious recognition, ears flicking at distant sounds with curiosity rather than panic. It was found in the trembling nudge of a paw, the warmth pressed against a chest, the whispered reassurance that life, against all odds, could continue. The first true sunlight of the morning pierced the gray remnants of the storm, cutting through the clouds in soft golden slivers that fell across the fractured cityscape. Dust motes floated in the light, tiny sparks suspended in the quiet air, and for the first time, the devastation seemed less oppressive, less final. He carried Max in his arms, the dog's small body now steadier, trembling less with each step. The warmth beneath his hands was a steady pulse, a heartbeat of resilience in a world that had threatened to erase them both. Every breath carried the subtle sense of rain-soaked concrete, wet fur, and the faint, lingering tang of ash, but they no longer stung. They were markers of survival, of life persisting against impossible odds. The city around him stirred. Birds cautiously emerged from broken eaves, their tentative chirps a fragile symphony against the quiet of ruins. The cracked walls glimmered in sunlight, shadows stretching across broken streets like reminders of the night's ordeal. Yet in this fractured world, he noticed details previously invisible. Small shoots of green sprouting through cracks, puddles reflecting the sky, and the gentle ripple of water stirred by wind. Each sign of life seemed to affirm their own fragile revival. Max pressed closer against his chest, ears twitching, eyes scanning the new light with curiosity rather than fear. And he felt the quiet swell of gratitude, the kind that settles deep into the chest, grounding and almost painful in its intensity. They moved slowly, cautiously, over debris that had once been familiar streets, now a maze of jagged fragments and unstable surfaces. Every step was deliberate, every footfall measured, yet there was a rhythm, a gentle flow born of endurance. The tactile connection, the weight of Max against him, the warmth of fur pressing to his chest, remained central, a shared anchor in the midst of a recovering world. Each glance, each subtle nuzzle communicated trust, love, and the quiet acknowledgement that they had survived something monumental together. He whispered softly, voice almost reverent, "We made it together. You're safe now." And Max responded with a tentative lick to his hand, a small affirmation of that bond. They reached a patch of relative safety, a clearing between collapsed buildings where the sun fell unbroken. He set Max down gently on a patch of dry ground, the warmth of sunlight falling across his fur. The dog shook once, scattering dust and droplets, then looked up at him, eyes wide, curious and alive. Relief surged like a tide, almost overwhelming in its intensity. He knelt beside him, hands tracing the familiar contours of small shoulders, fur damp from rain but glistening in the light, every touch a ritual of reassurance. The tactile intimacy, the weight of life in his hands, was now a quiet triumph, a testament to survival, courage, and the quiet resilience of love. Max explored cautiously, tentative steps over debris, sniffing at the broken world with cautious curiosity. Each movement was mirrored by a deep inhale from him, a meditative acknowledgement of life's persistence. The bond forged in fear and crisis had transformed into something gentler but equally profound. Every subtle nudge, every brush of fur against skin, every hesitant tail wag became a vocabulary of trust, proof that even after trauma, connection could be rebuilt, stronger and more intimate than before. He allowed himself a moment to simply watch, to witness recovery in real time, the weight of exhaustion and fear giving way to gratitude, love and quiet awe. He noticed subtle changes in the world around them. Sunlight pooling in broken windows, the sound of water dripping from fractured gutters, the occasional chirp of birds reclaiming territory. Each detail was magnified, significant, part of the slow rebuilding not only of the environment, but of spirit. He brushed Max's fur absent-mindedly, feeling the warmth return to his trembling body, listening to the slow, even breathing that signaled trust and comfort. Their survival, fragile yet undeniable, had shifted the emotional landscape from desperation to reflection. The tactile and emotional intimacy formed in the crucible of fear now became a sanctuary, a quiet space where healing could unfold naturally. Hours passed in slow rhythms. They rested together amidst the ruins, Max curling into his chest, occasional whines replaced by soft sighs of contentment. He stroked fur, whispered words, allowed himself to inhale the sense of life. Mud, rain, ash, and fur, allowing each detail to anchor him to the present. Recovery was subtle, poetic, not dramatic. It was found in the small gestures of trust, the rising and falling of a calm chest, the warmth of shared proximity. Each moment was weighted, layered, a meditation on survival and the quiet persistence of hope. As evening approached, the sky painted itself in muted oranges and soft purples, reflected in puddles of water that caught every hue, turning them into fragile mirrors of beauty amidst devastation. He watched Max explore, first tentatively, then with increasing confidence, until the dog ran a short distance and returned, tail wagging faintly, eyes bright. He laughed softly, a sound raw with exhaustion and joy, a release of the tension accumulated over hours of fear, panic, and rescue. The tactile connection, the shared presence had endured, and in that endurance lay a quiet transcendence. Survival was no longer just about life. It was about intimacy, trust, and the reconstruction of the soul as much as the body. Night fell gently, wrapping the clearing in a soft, forgiving darkness. Stars emerged slowly, distant and indifferent, yet comforting in their constancy. He lay beside Max on the patch of dry ground, pressing close, feeling the warmth and life beneath his hands, listening to the small, steady heartbeat that had endured against all odds. The tactile intimacy, the pulse, the breathing, the trembling that had become calm, was now a lullaby, a meditation, and a testament. The world around them might be fractured, unpredictable, and harsh, but within this small cocoon of shared presence, trust and survival had created a sanctuary. Finally, he whispered into the quiet night, words that carried gratitude, love, and awe. "We're here. You're alive. We made it together." Max nestled closer, a small warm weight pressing against him, a silent response of trust and recognition. The tactile and emotional bond, forged in terror and sustained through recovery, had become a quiet triumph of resilience. And as he closed his eyes, breathing in the soft, scented air of rain-soaked streets and resilient life, he realized something profound. Even in broken worlds, light finds its way through the cracks, life endures, and the quiet intimacy of survival leaves an indelible mark upon the heart.